Please pardon me. We're going to back to Baghdad. There's activity in Baghdad. Let's watch and listen. That's the sound of anti-aircraft fire, not incoming. What that sound was, no one can say for sure. This is the way things started last night. First air raid sirens, then anti-aircraft fire. Whether that was a boom from incoming or not, there's simply no way to tell. Certainly the Iraqis believe that their aircraft and or missiles, either incoming or about to come in. What they try to do is put up a curtain of fire. Still some pops in the distance. General Buck Kernan, who's with me here. General, no way to tell whether this is in fact another U.S. attack on Baghdad.
No, it's not, Dan. It looks like it is air defense systems being fired from the ground. You've got air bursts there. You're not seeing any ground explosions. Their anxiety level has got to be high. They're probably as tight as a banjo string right now, so anything that goes bump in the night, they're liable to respond to.
Well, one thing to keep in mind that
hundreds, how many?
well, there's a pause. There were air raid sirens, then the anti-aircraft fire. If there were any big hits of weaponry incoming, we're unaware of it. General Kernan, we're going to hold on to this picture for a bit to see what should we expect in the very first of the major aerial bombardment of Iraq.
Well, I think the thing you're going to see is a totally integrated fight. The ground, air, and sea systems all coming to bear on a particular target or targets. I think it's going to be very overwhelming. You've got to be a very disciplined and very well-trained force to withstand that.
General, when you talk about, as has been talked about, as we talk over this live picture of Baghdad to see what the sirens followed by anti-aircraft fire may mean in Baghdad, when you talk about firing hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles and laser-guided bombs, try as we may, true or untrue, that there are bound to be considerable civilian casualties on the ground?
Possibly. It all depends on where we target them. We're going to be very precise in our targeting. We will try to do what we can to avoid the major metropolitan areas because we know there are civilians in there. But this is going to be one of those decisions that General Franks and his subordinate commanders are going to have to make, looking at a target. And if it is a military necessity, they will do everything they can to mitigate collateral damage.
General Buck Kernan, you're looking at a live picture of Baghdad. We're going to go to videotape so you can see and hear what happened a few minutes ago. First there were the air raid sirens, and then this is what people in Baghdad inside their homes with their noses and eyes pressed to the glass, looking outside. That'd be foolish to press to the glass. But this is a videotape a few minutes ago. We'll just watch and listen. Now we go back to live picture. Now, Baghdad is under attack, I think, would you not say?
Yeah, it definitely looked like we had some ground explosions there.
Incoming because there were ground explosions. So for the second time in just less than 24 hours, Baghdad is under attack. And the earth shakes. Live picture of Baghdad under attack for the second time in 24 hours. This is not videotape. Anti-aircraft fire mixed with incoming hits. Night in Baghdad. Rockets' red glare, bombs bursting in air, and some hitting the ground with tremendous force. We're trying to keep our commentary to a minimum here so you can see and hear it and experience it as much as is possible on television. You will see huge bellowing smoke coming up on the right-hand side. Go to the right corner of your screen. But of course, there's no way for television to convey the horror on the ground in the area of one of these big hits from a cruise Tomahawk missile or a guided bomb. The smoke on the right-hand side rising ever higher, like a symbolic tower of destruction. Deja vu. Scenes we saw once before, 12 years ago. That's the thump of anti-aircraft fire. Here is David Chater of Sky News, our CBS affiliate, filing his report live from Baghdad. All of this is live. David Chater speaks. Where we had hopes there, we thought we had David Chater up. You will understand under the circumstances, it's not that easy to get up from Baghdad under these circumstances.
Huge blitz.
Now here
it
it
just
is.
seems to be a very accurate, narrowly focused set of cruise missiles that have hit their targets. Those targets that I can see at the moment in the lights of the city, now being blocked out by the smoke rising from those targets, are Republican Guard units. They are Ba'ath Party headquarters maybe has been hit. I've got quite a large view, and four targets right in front of me burning away and smoke billowing down the Tigris past me. They would seem to be, as we suspected, command and control centers, Republican Guard units and bunkers, maybe some radar and air defense sites. Those are the areas that have been hit. All the lights are still on and blazing away in the city. We haven't seen an attack on any of the electricity grids, power stations, or the bridges. A very ferocious, narrowly focused attack on the command and control centers and the structures of power here inside Baghdad. Yet again, an object lesson of the smart technology, the accuracy of the cruise missiles, and the desire of the Allies, of course, to limit as much as possible civilian casualties. These look like they were very accurate strikes.
Surgical strikes is what the Pentagon said it planned. They seem to be precise so far. We can see the orangey grey smoke billowing away to the right of the screen, just beyond those bright lights, to the right of the mosque where, as you were saying, David, that Republican Guard, probably a command and control center, has been hit by the looks of it. Donald Rumsfeld, David, was saying to the people of Iraq, stay away from military complexes, stay away from command and control places. We have no wish to harm you. Just stay at home and keep away from anything that might be hit. Do you think they will heed those words?
This is David Chater is now talking with his home office. What you're seeing is live coverage from Baghdad. Sky TV reporter David Chater, who also files for CBS News, is at this moment reporting live. He is talking to his headquarters in London. So that's what you're hearing. We go back to Baghdad live. Huge bellowing smoke, hanging now like some immense drapery over Baghdad. Explosions could be heard from the west side of the Tigris River. That would be, just to refresh your memory, the Tigris River is to the west. The Euphrates, the Tigris River to the east, forgive me, the Tigris River to the east and the Euphrates River to the west, if you're looking at your Iraq map, which we'll show you in a minute. But anyway, explosions could be heard from the west side of the Tigris River, where at least 2 of Saddam Hussein's palaces and the intelligence headquarters are located. Explosions and large clouds of gray smoke appeared to be closer to the heart of the city. This is a wide shot there. You can see as the smoke is drifting over the city. So, not to confuse you, the Tigris River, which runs more in the eastern portion of central Iraq, the Euphrates River to the west, this was on the major hits seem to be on the west side of the Tigris River. Now that's where 2 of Saddam's palaces are, and the intelligence headquarters is also located in that general area. But after the major explosions, we haven't heard a major hit explosion in the last, well, several seconds, if not minutes. This tremendous column of smoke rose up and then began to disperse. More anti-aircraft fire. Let's listen up. As you heard David Chater, correspondent there, say on the air, it was his belief that these strikes were by cruise missiles. General Buck Kernan, as we continue to listen...
I'll see if I can do that.
Hold on just a moment. That would be the target, the weapon of preference.
I believe so. They could be integrated with some F-117s again, but in all probability, these were cruise missiles. As you've already pointed out, you've got the palaces there. The Ba'ath Party headquarters is to the west of the Tigris River there. There's an awful lot of communications facilities there. So I think those are the things they're going to target right now. They'll be very selective in their targeting to reduce the destruction of the civilian infrastructure. So they're going to target those things that basically isolate and ideally decapitate the command and control of the Iraqi military.
As we continue to look at the attack on Baghdad, this is a live picture and sound. We're going to go to the Pentagon. David Martin, what information do you have for us?
Well, Dan, believe it or not, the Pentagon cannot confirm that that attack is taking place, and I think that is an indication of how much this plan is being rewired as we go, all as a result of last night's attempt to short-circuit the entire process and get off that shot to kill Saddam. These look to be not the start of an all-out air assault on Baghdad, but rather trying to take down individual points in the command and control structure. And this is different than the original plan. And you can only surmise that it has to do with playing off last night's attack, where they think they eliminated the leadership, or at least forced the leadership to go into such deep cover that they are totally unable to communicate. And now, of course, they're taking out the means by which their successors might communicate. And it's all part of the same air campaign, which also involved destroying relay sites, radio relay sites out in the western desert. Take down the leadership positions, take down the communications that they use to control their troops. And it's what you want to do before you start the main thrust of the invasion force into Iraqi territory. So that
Excuse me, David, we're going to return live to Baghdad. There's some noise there. Forgive me. Again, it sounds like anti-aircraft fire. I didn't hear anything it sounded like incoming, but it's certainly hard to tell. Some urgent news come across. F-14 and F-18 jet fighter bombers have been taking off from the USS Theodore Roosevelt. That's a carrier in the eastern Mediterranean. I mean, underscore, not in the Persian Gulf, not in the Red Sea. These F-14s and F-18 jets, they are armed with missiles and bombs. There's no word on whether they were headed to Baghdad or other targets in Iraq. We'll keep this picture up in part of the screen, but want to show you the map here because it gets confusing about where these attacks come. The cruise and Tomahawk missiles are often fired from the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf area. But the Theodore Roosevelt is up in the Mediterranean Sea. Hold on just a second here. Big noise there. At any rate, these F-14s and F-18s have to fly a pretty long way, sort of dip down and around to get into that. Ooh, that was a big noise. Might have been incoming.
Probably was a cruise missile strike.
Seeing this huge cloud, which we could see coming up the right-hand side of the screen and then envelop Baghdad, it looks a little like that scene as we reporters came into Kuwait City near the end of the 1991 war when Saddam Hussein had set his oil fields afire and there was literally darkness at noon. However, this is darkness at Baghdad time, about 9:20.
Well, Dan, he probably is trying to do some things like light off some of those oiled trenches and some other things for obscuration. It's not going to do them a whole lot of good because our precision targeting now, in particular through GPS and satellites, enabled us to be very, very precise in targeting the facilities we're after.
As we listen for more hits, clearly Baghdad has been under attack now for roughly 15, 20 minutes, certainly by cruise missiles, perhaps I should say almost certainly by cruise missiles, and perhaps additional weapons delivered by fixed-wing aircraft such as the F-117 stealth bomber. It's now 9:23 a.m. Baghdad time. PM, sorry, I spoke myself, 9:23 in the evening, Baghdad time. One reason we pointed out before that they strike at night is because the F-117 stealth bombers are equipped with the laser-guided weaponry. Generally speaking, they don't operate during the daytime because they're too vulnerable. Now, you may want to note that R.A. Fleischer said in his briefing that in the absence of proof that Saddam Hussein is gone, the U.S. is proceeding with their systematic destruction of command and control facilities, which is no doubt part of what this is about. Now, what those F-14s and F-18 jets taking off from the carrier Theodore Roosevelt in the Mediterranean are, whether they are part of an attack on Baghdad or not, is unclear at this moment. And if not Baghdad, then where they are attacking. While this is going on, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division has moved into southern Iraq. It has crossed the border and gone into southern Iraq, preceded by attack helicopters knocking out tanks, other armor in fixed positions. Also walked ahead of them artillery barrages. We've had that on the air in recent hours with Scott Pelley on one scene with the helicopter attacks and Jim Axelrod on another with the artillery. Axelrod is now with the 3rd Infantry Division, which, as we look at this live picture of Baghdad and listen to sporadic anti-aircraft fire, punctuated big time occasionally by huge weapons of considerable destruction hitting into Baghdad, way south of here, Baghdad, the U.S. Marines have been engaged in some at least limited ground combat on what we believe to be the Kuwaiti side of the Iraq-Kuwait border, perhaps taking on some patrols or spotter outfits of Iraqis we don't know, but the Marines were involved in a shootout there. But the 3rd Infantry Division has definitely launched into Iraq itself. I haven't heard any huge hits in Baghdad for a while, as was the case last night. There were hits, and then it ended. Now, whether this is going to end now or not, there were, as best we could make out, well, we'll put it this way, We believe there were more cruise missiles, different hits in areas around Baghdad, seeming to concentrate on the west side of the Tigris River. Keep in mind the Tigris River runs through Baghdad. The Euphrates is a bit west of there. U.S. cruise missiles have hit the center of Baghdad. U.S. cruise missiles have hit the center of Baghdad. They shook the city like a series of small earthquakes. Eyewitnesses in Baghdad point out that plumes of smoke rose from the vicinity of the Foreign Ministry and the Planning Ministry after the missile strikes. So suggested targets, believed targets, some of Saddam's palaces, the Foreign Ministry, the Planning Ministry. And this air attack has been far more intense than the strikes last night, which launched the U.S.-led war against Iraq. Cynthia Bowers is on the telephone. Cruise missiles were fired again from the Abraham Lincoln carrier group, which is in the Persian Gulf. Cynthia, come in.
Dan, and leadership on board the USS Abraham Lincoln refuses to confirm or deny whether these missiles were indeed launched from the same battle groups that launched the attacks last night, which makes you believe that that could be a possibility. As you've been alluding to all along, U.S. military here has felt that the Tomahawks and cruise and TLAM missiles could take out key defenses, key intelligence areas and key air defenses that could soften Baghdad before they start with a full-out aerial assault. Having Marines and Army on the ground, of course, they're going to need air support of some kind. And you talked a bit about, a few minutes ago, in essence, the armada that travels with these carriers in the battle groups. You know, that is, as you mentioned, a lot of ships in the Persian Gulf right now with these three carrier groups, the Kitty Hawk, the Constellation, and the USS Lincoln. And there are a lot of planes on board these ships, more than 70 plus on the USS Lincoln alone. And naturally, the Navy and the Air Force, in addition to air assaults, are charged with protecting the ground troops. Many of the big, deep-hulled ships like these carriers can't get too close to shore, where the waters are shallow and the shipping lanes are narrow. So the aircraft assigned to a particular carrier kind of has to stick around that carrier so it can protect it. So there's a very delicate ballet that could be underway right now. As ground forces are moving in, some of the shallower vessels will be moving in closer to shore. They'll be providing helicopter and air support for the ground forces and the amphibious Marines. And then from the carrier, the F-14s and the F-18s and the other fighter jets from the carriers will then kind of fly to a midway point where they can protect the ships that are protecting the ground forces, and they can also get back to their carriers in case it looks like there's an attack coming from there. So there is a lot of intricate work going on right now to maneuver this thing into place.
Thank you, Cynthia Bowers. Bulletin, the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force has crossed into Iraq on the ground. So now you have the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division operating on the ground in Iraq. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force has crossed into Iraq. There no longer can be any doubt, if there was any, that the ground war started. Now, what you're seeing is live picture from Baghdad. Let's pick up the sound, if any, there. Well, Baghdad is burning, at least parts of it. And with this kind of sustained aerial attack, nothing compared with the opening of the 1991 war, and keep in mind it was said all along, this war is going to be different. And we already see it in the form and substance and pattern of the aerial attacks. But when you have these kinds of aerial attacks, the possibility, the probability of what's called, quote, collateral damage is a question that has to go through one's mind, because these are precision weapons, but with the very best of precision weapons, they sometimes miss. We are not suggesting that any of these have missed. We're posing the question that must run through our minds, well, what is the possibility they've missed? And even if they have hit precisely every target that they were designed to hit in those palaces, in the Foreign Ministry, and the other ministry that was said to be a target here, it can be rightly assumed that there are people in those buildings, part of the Iraqi military, part of the Ba'ath Party, which has supported Saddam Hussein. And that's one reason that both the poets and the soldiers always say war is worse not on the battlefields. Where war is worst is in the hospitals. And without question, Baghdad's hospitals will begin to fill up after this kind of attack. David Martin has an update from the Pentagon. David?
Dan, clearly what's happened here is that the ground war has been advanced by more than 24 hours. It wasn't initially supposed to start until Friday night. But here we are in the middle of Thursday, and the two major ground forces have already crossed into Iraq. And at the same time, the air war seems to be dialed back. They don't seem to be conducting this all-out assault, the shock and awe assault that we had heard so much about prior to the start of this war. And one senior official suggested to me that the reason for this is that with the fate of Saddam up in the air, and with the very real possibility that he may be dead, they want to dial back the amount of destruction that they cause in Baghdad, because the next phase of this war, which would be the occupation of Iraq, you're going to need the goodwill of the Iraqi people for that to succeed. And so the less you destroy of their capital, the fewer hard feelings there are going to be.
Style missiles and possibly fixed-wing aircraft attacks. Heavier, I believe we'd be accurate to say much heavier than last night's attacks, but not nearly as heavy as the original attacks on Baghdad in 1991. Sky TV reporter David Chater is reporting live. He's talking to his headquarters in London, and we picked it up live.
Iraqi armored personnel carriers in the first reported ground combat. So that attack a few hours ago, and that was a prelude to what has been going on in the furious ground battle that has been raging around the Kuwaiti-Iraq border, many miles to the south of where you're seeing these dramatic night-scope pictures of the center, the heart of Baghdad, the Iraqi capital, burning now with the reflection of the flames along the river Tigris, right in the very center of the city. We can, David Chater, our correspondent there, restricted in what he can tell us, therefore very difficult for him to point in the direction, but from what I can see, I think I recognize some fairly major ministry buildings in the background. Now let's
cut away for a moment from David Chater's running commentary of a struck and severely struck Baghdad. Forces of the United Kingdom, British forces, are now engaged in ground operations against Iraq. So now you have the U.S. Marine Expeditionary Force operating on the ground inside Iraq, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division from the Army operating inside Iraq, and the British forces engaged in a ground attack inside Iraq. And you heard David Chatham say that there was fierce fighting reported along the Iraq-Kuwaiti border. He was talking to his Sky headquarters in London. We have an arrangement with Sky where we're able to take advantage of his reporting. That's the way that happens. But keep in mind that David there in Baghdad is a long way from the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border. And I simply want to underscore, we do not, at least not yet, know how much fighting has actually gone on, whether the fighting is fierce or it's a case of that the Marines, the U.S. Army troops, and now the British troops are rolling, just keep on rolling. We don't know. What David Martin said that they, and he reports that the U.S. may be dialing back on the air attack underway in Baghdad now to preserve more of Baghdad, hoping that Saddam is either dead or disabled. This sets aside the question of who is this man who's appeared on television twice in the last 24 hours, including once in the last several hours, who is reputed to be Saddam Hussein, today appearing at what was said to be a cabinet meeting. All of that remains clouded in complete mystery. And perhaps the best, fairest, and most accurate way to put it is the U.S. Defense Department is, of course, hoping that they may have killed Saddam Hussein last night, hoping against hope that this person appearing on television is not actually Saddam Hussein, but they can't know for sure, so they have to continue the attack. But what we do know is what's different between this time, the attacks on Baghdad, and what happened at the start of the air war in 1991. There's a whole different approach. You can argue whether it's a better approach or not as good, but recognize it as a different approach. The idea is to preserve as much of the Iraqi infrastructure, bridges, roads, buildings as possible, because the hope of the U.S. is it can have a proverbial lightning strike victory on the ground in Iraq, and that it will then be able to take over the country and quickly make a transition into showing the Iraqi people that this is in fact an army of liberation and in fact something to their great benefit. And the thinking has been, one can agree or disagree with it, that by preserving as much of the infrastructure as possible, that will help do that so-called second phase, if you will. As you look at Baghdad burning, this is an effort to blitz Iraq in this sense. The idea is to kill Saddam Hussein if they can, but if not, to spook him, to give him the willies, to give him a bad case of the nerves, and to scare him literally out of his wits if they can do so, and certainly to cut him off as much as possible from communication, not only with his troops in the field, but also with the bureaucratic apparatus that is the Ba'ath Party, built along the lines of Stalinism out of the old Soviet Union, and also to cut him off as much as possible from communicating with the Iraqi people. Scott Pelley, more action on the border between Kuwait and Iraq. We pick it up live. Come in, Scott.
Dan, another massive artillery barrage. I don't know if you can hear it in the background behind me, but clearly the guns of the 3rd Infantry Division, the big 155 howitzers, are going off in a chorus that is thundering all over this battlefield. We'd had a lull here of about 45 minutes or so while you were switched to Baghdad, but in just the last few minutes, just off to my left, we've had this tremendous barrage occurring. The 3rd Infantry Division is just in front of me to the left. The Iraqi border is right behind me. Also behind me, we had some fixed-wing aircraft, some jets dropping a number of large bombs, high-energy ordnance dropping over my shoulder earlier. You could feel the concussion at our present position. We do not see any of the armor moving at the moment, but of course we're on a battlefield that is completely blacked out. There is a full moon here tonight, Dan, but because there is so much sand in the air, such a dust storm at the high altitude, the moon is almost completely obscure. It is completely dark. I can't emphasize that enough. And so what you're able to report about this battlefield at the moment is what you can hear, not so much what you can see. The artillery barrage is continuing unabated. We can also hear a Predator unmanned surveillance plane flying back and forth over the border in that same region that we saw the helicopter missile attacks earlier. So the ground campaign, Dan, fully joined. The 1st Marine Expeditionary Force is rolling. The 3rd ID Infantry Division is rolling, and the artillery is obviously laying down a tremendous barrage ahead of those troops to pave the way. Dan?
Scott Pelley reporting live from the Iraqi-Kuwait border. The Marine Expeditionary Force is stabbed into southern Iraq. So is the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division, and the British troops are inside Iraq fighting. Whether they're fighting and dying, we do not know. But it might be as good a time as any as we watch Baghdad aflame, recognize the combat that is going on in southern Iraq, the nature of war, the savagery of war. Savagery by definition is war. It may be time to give some fairly serious thought to thanking our lucky stars that we live in the United States of America. I want to point out to you that Jim Axelrod, as we look at this live picture in Baghdad, we're staying with it because you see the flames The whole city is not afire. It might appear to be so with this television picture. Remember, Baghdad is a big, sprawling metropolis there along the Tigris River. A bit like Los Angeles, it seems to go on forever. It's the biggest city in the country, 5 or 6 million people, and what we are showing you is just a very small section of it. General Kernan.
I think that's an excellent point. We are being very selective in what we are targeting. And of course, been coupled with that has been the psychological operations that have been ongoing, informing the people what to do to protect themselves, to stay out of the damaged area.
Dateline Washington, the administration of President George W. Bush and the U.S. government and Defense Department have confirmed that the U.S. launched cruise missile attacks in Baghdad against Republican Guard strongholds. Now, we had earlier reports that the Foreign Ministry, at least one other ministry, 2 of Saddam's palaces, and now Republican Guard strongholds. Keep in mind, as we've said before, and we want to emphasize again, that you can think of the Iraqi army in 3 categories. The lowest is the People's Army, made up most of conscripts. Then there are the Republican Guard forces, combination of conscripts and somewhat better trained troops. Then there are the elite Republican Guards, those with the most loyalty to Saddam Hussein, the best equipped, and if anybody's going to fight, they may. And there have been reports, David Chatham with Sky News, reporting on our air as well as his own in London, saying that he had indications that at least a division and a half of the elite Republican Guards had been pulled back inside Baghdad. No way to completely confirm that, but that was his observation and reported at the time. Now, this would suggest that Saddam Hussein, if he's still alive, plans a sort of last stand, if you will, a come and get me in Baghdad kind of position. Fuad Ajami in Washington, our CBS News consultant and distinguished professor at Johns Hopkins University, everyone is aware of America's prowess, overwhelming prowess, the world's only what we call full-service superpower, a superpower economically and militarily. With that in mind, how are these pictures likely to play to an already nervous world, and particularly in the world of Islam?
Well, Dan, that's a very good question, because it's really the disparity of power is part of the burden of this campaign, the difference of power between the Iraqi regime and this man hunkered down in his bunker, if he's still around, and this superpower whose dimensions you have so well described. I think our dilemma will be large in the Arab world in particular, but it shouldn't be exaggerated. In fact, if you take a look at the neighbors of Saddam, by and large, we have a fair measure of cooperation throughout the Arab world. Saddam doesn't enjoy the kind of support he enjoyed a decade or so ago, but the sight of an Arab city again coming under this kind of bombardment will be difficult. This was the burden of the campaign all along, and our leaders knew it.
Fuad Ajami, true or untrue, that on the various Arab streets, I know you agree it's always a mistake speaking of one Arab street, there are many Arab streets, but on the Arab streets, that Osama bin Laden with 9/11 completely obliterated Saddam Hussein as the Arab avenger, the new champion of the streets?
I think you have it right, Dan. I think in many ways after September 11, all of a sudden, the floating crowd that had once been chanting in the streets, with our blood and our souls, we sacrifice ourselves for you, or Saddam suddenly switched its allegiance to Osama bin Laden. There is no love lost for this Iraqi leader. And there are parts of the Arab world, parts of the Arab street, this divided Arab street that you described, which are actually hoping that Saddam will be demolished and his regime will be ended. This is true in Kuwait, it's true in Qatar, it's true among the Shia of Lebanon, etc. So I think it's a very different landscape than it was a dozen years ago during Desert Storm.
Fuad Ajami, our CBS News consultant and one of the world's ranking authorities on Middle Eastern affairs, the world of Islam. Stay with us, if you will, Fuad, for a moment while I report that the strikes against Baghdad are heavy and are continuing, and you can see this is a live picture from Baghdad, that enormous cloud hanging over the city and just sort of hanging there now along the banks of the Tigris River. Destruction in various parts of the city, but we're going to say again that while we've seen parts of the city in flames, the whole of Baghdad, city of 5 to 6 million people, is not. Places to watch, Fuad Ajami, as we look at this live picture in Baghdad. What happens now after these attacks in Pakistan? There are a long line of places I want to ask you about, but let's just start with Pakistan. What's the potential that this will have a big backlash there affecting our efforts in Afghanistan?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because obviously we have to watch different parts of the Islamic world. And I think things in Pakistan is a volatile polity all along. And we have the government in Pakistan with us, i.e. we have General Musharraf. He's been nicknamed by his people Busharraf for his alliance with President Bush. But nevertheless, I think the Pakistani scene will hold. There is hostility, no doubt, among the Islamists to American power. But I think the Pakistani regime made its call. It could either join the pariahs of the nations, or it could be with us in the campaign against the Taliban, and it could wink and acquiesce in this war against Saddam Hussein. I think things will be okay there.
Fuad Ajami, always a pleasure to work with you, and I hope you'll be around because we intend to call on you frequently. Live in Baghdad, the aerial attack appears to be over for the moment. You never know for sure, so that's one reason we're hanging on this picture. Also, for those of you who have just joined us or perhaps have been away for a bit, the ground war far south of Baghdad is underway. U.S. Marine 1st Division, the U.S. Marine Expeditionary Force, is now in southern Iraq, moving there. We have CBS News correspondent John Roberts traveling with them, and we may hear from him on the roll with the Marines at any time. The U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division has moved across the border and is now operating in southern Iraq. The British forces, some of the British forces have also moved into southern Iraq. The ground war is underway. This is not the way the script was originally written. The script was originally written that there'd be a massive aerial assault, perhaps combined with some ground operations, and then would come a major ground invasion of Iraq. But flexibility is the key, one of the keys to military success. And what's happened here, one, they hit what they thought was a place that Saddam Hussein might be last night. Obviously, they can't be for sure whether they got him or whether he was even there, but there was some desire to follow on to that. Also, 2 divisions of People's Army forces, the least of the Iraqi armed forces, were ready to give up in southern Iraq. And hours went by, and somebody no doubt said, well, what are you going to do about these people? 8,000 to 10,000 troops down there. We've either got to move to get them, or they will become, if you will, a big refugee tide running in the face of our planned land invasion. That was a factor. Some oil wells, not necessarily the whole oil field in southern Iraq around Basra, was set aflame. And the U.S. forces have always said if Saddam Hussein did something like that, set the oil fields afire, they'd have to move. Then also today, early in the day, let us not forget that Saddam Hussein's forces launched at least 3 missile attacks in the direction of U.S. troops in Kuwait and perhaps toward Kuwait City. Certainly one, and we believe 2 of them were knocked out of the sky by Patriot missile defense systems. Another landed in the general area of some Marines but did no damage. So with all that in the mix, the decision was made, let's move on the ground. And that decision apparently was made sometime this morning, because while we weren't sure between 11 a.m. and about noon Eastern time that the ground war was starting, it's now very clear that the ground war is indeed fairly well underway. Fuad Ajami in Washington, you saw some of this videotape of Saddam Hussein. We don't know whether the appearance was videotape or live. Is it your judgment that was indeed Saddam Hussein?
Well, I have to confess I was teaching today, so I didn't really have a chance to see that.
Well, that's fair enough.
Yes.
We want to say, bring you up to date on Baghdad as you look at the picture here with that big cloud. What an ominous-looking cloud over Baghdad at the moment. U.S. cruise missiles hit the center of Baghdad and shook the city. with a series of explosions. There's no question from all the eyewitnesses, including our own David Chatham, we say our own, the Sky News reporter who's helping us in Baghdad, but all eyewitness testimony indicates that this was a heavier attack than the first one last night. Big plumes of smoke began rising from the vicinity of the Foreign Ministry and the Planning Ministry. At least one of Saddam's presidential palaces was also hit, and perhaps two of them were struck. The western bank of the Tigris River, the river in which Saddam Hussein sometimes fishes. He uses a hand line to fish. Pretty old-fashioned way of doing it, but just to give some texture to it, that he would sometimes go out of his palace, one of the palaces along the banks of the Tigris River, and fish for a little while. Well, the whole western bank of the Tigris River, which cuts through the capital city of Baghdad, is now enveloped in smoke. A number of government ministries, note, are located on the west bank of the Tigris. Now, to the east of the city, just to the east of Baghdad itself, were at least a couple of explosions in the vicinity of the Al-Rashid military base, not to be confused with the Al-Rashid Hotel, which is in downtown Baghdad. And that would indicate that the Republican Guard indeed was being targeted. And out of Washington, a government official confirmed that among the targets of this hit on Baghdad and the surrounding area, it was intended to hit some Republican Guard units. Keep in mind that the belief is those may be the elite Republican Guard units. This U.S. attack on Baghdad was much more intense than the previous strikes last night. And Reuters now has a witness, and they're quoting the buildings on fire around the Planning Ministry in central Baghdad, and that's some of the flames that you saw on that earlier picture. Stephen Black, former arms inspector, now CBS News consultant. Why hit one of Saddam's Baghdad palaces, or maybe two, when I would think that that'd be among the last places he would be?
I think you're exactly right. It probably is the last place he'd be, but that doesn't diminish the psychological value of people tomorrow morning in Baghdad waking up and seeing the burned out hulk of Saddam's palace, or even right now seeing flashes in the distance in the direction that every citizen of Baghdad knows that's where the palace is. That's the area you're afraid to drive by. If you have to drive by, you don't look out the window, you don't slow down. They all know what's over there and they're afraid of it. And if you can show them that that's been destroyed, it'll have a good solid impact on their psychology and their any continued fear of this regime they might have.
Interesting point, because for anyone who's been inside one of those palaces, it is almost impossible for a Westerner to imagine how elaborate, how expensively decorated they are. And they were hit during the 1991 war, and in the interim, they were rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. Not one palace, not two palaces, but a whole series of palaces. And so the symbolism of hitting those palaces, whether there's anybody in them or not, could become important, because, as you say, every person waking up in Baghdad with these great explosions would look in that direction, and what they would see is this immense covering of smoke and fire. The ground war is definitely underway. The Marines are now active on the ground in southern Iraq. The U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division, which appears to have been the first to cross the border, is active. So are the British troops. There is fierce combat believed to be underway, and you're watching continuing CBS News coverage.
Now, live, this is a special edition of CBS 4 News, America at War.
Good afternoon, South Florida. I'm Maggie Rodriguez.
And I'm Elliot Rodriguez. Less than an hour ago, bombs blasted for the second time in 24 hours in Baghdad, and right now much of that city is on fire.
And on the Kuwait-Iraqi border, certainly activity. We spoke with CBS 4's Mike Kirsch, the only South Florida reporter in the region, just a few minutes ago, and he definitely can verify he's witnessing combat in action.
In a lot of fire. No reports on casualties, but I can tell you from being in Baghdad myself in 1991, when you have this type of explosives in the city, the bombs coming in, the cruise missiles, you are going to have casualties. We saw casualties then. A very heavy bombing campaign right now in Baghdad.
Where exactly are you, Mike? What are you seeing or hearing from your vantage point, and what are you doing to stay safe?
Well, it's very difficult right now. We're very close to Iraq, probably about 500 yards. We can hear the distant thunder of so many artillery pieces and tanks just blasting away along the entire border of Kuwait and Iraq as troops are starting to move in. The earth is shaking beneath us, Maggie. Just tremendous firepower here, pitch black darkness, and many, many Marines in the desert tonight starting to move in across Iraq.
So definitely a much more stepped up campaign than we saw in what was early this morning out there in Baghdad. Tell us about the benefit or the reason that the U.S. chooses to step up activity at night.
Well, it just totally outclasses the enemy. I mean, the enemy does not have the equipment to see at night, number one. And I can tell you right now, Maggie, for example, I cannot see 5 feet in front of me. It's that dark, and yet I can hear Marines crawling around me like giant scorpions, locking and loading their weapons, ready to shoot anything that moves. The thunderous artillery that's coming in right now is just overwhelming, and if you're an Iraqi soldier and you cannot see at night, you don't know what's coming at you. From a psychological point of view alone, you're outgunned, you're outnumbered, and you start crawling into a hole. I mean, this is the best way to fight a war. We're seeing that right now. It's also a very dangerous way to fight a war, but we're around the best fighting forces in the world right now, and we feel pretty safe.
Mike, the Bush administration said that this would be unlike any war that we have ever seen, more technologically advanced, and certainly paling by comparison to the Gulf War in 1991. Do you think we're seeing that difference already?
Yeah, I mean, you can tell the reports along the lines here that hundreds, if not thousands, of ground forces all the way across are starting to move in. The reason they're doing this is because, Maggie, there have been special forces, soldiers, Marines, recon units, special ops from the Air Force, all people inside for weeks, if not months. Just think about that, living inside enemy territory, living in a hole during the day, working at night, knowing every single target that needs to be taken out. It's because of this type of technology that allows the American forces to have the huge upper hand to be able to go in on a night like tonight and really surprise the Iraqis. We don't know what kind of resistance there is in the south right now, but they're getting pounded. We can hear it and feel it running through the desert sand.
Mike, since we have the unique opportunity that no other station in town has of having you there in the trenches with them, let's personalize this a bit and tell me what it's like to be out there with them. Do you sleep? What do you eat? And are you scared?
Well, tonight, for example, before tonight, we spent the entire day with this special unit of Marines. Okay, we've got artillery now firing in behind us. I don't know if you can hear that, Maggie.
We sure can.
Okay, these are British guns blasting away with U.S. guns behind our back. So, in essence, we are in front of the guns right now. Artillery pieces blasting behind us, firing in 155 millimeter rounds into Iraq.
That's Mike Kirsch reporting to us from the Iraq-Kuwait border. As Mike said right there, he's only, 500 yards from the border with Iraq, and he can hear the artillery fire. You heard it on the phone, very chilling sound.
Absolutely.
And Mike will continue his reporting right here with updates as America's war against Iraq continues.
And during this time of war, we want to remind you Neighbors for Neighbors is set up. Call them at 305-597-4404 if you feel like you need to talk to someone about this. We will see you again right here in an hour.
This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of America at War. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Top headlines of this hour, and this in from Washington, and it may confuse you. It certainly has confused us at least a bit. But officials who asked not to be identified are now cautioning that the troop movements and the fresh wave of night bombing and cruise missile strikes on Baghdad does not, I repeat, not represent a massive military attack, the one predicted and planned by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Baghdad has been attacked again, and parts of the city, just some parts of the city, are on fire. The second round of the U.S. cruise missile assault on the Iraqi capital began after nightfall with anti-aircraft fire, punctuated then by huge explosions, some of which you're seeing now on videotape. The Pentagon says the missiles were specifically targeted at Republican Guard barracks, among other places, with the other places we believe to be some of Saddam Hussein's palaces and some of the ministries. Listen, watch this for a minute. Cruise missile attack in Baghdad a short while ago. Now, to well to the south of this, the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division is said to be engaged in ground combat with Iraqi troops just north of the border with Kuwait. And there's word that the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force has crossed the border into Iraq. And the British have sent some of their ground troops into Iraq. And then comes this word, I repeat it for emphasis now, that officials in Washington say, don't be misled, while the ground war has started, this, what you're seeing now, is not the main part of the invasion force. More about that later. As for Saddam Hussein, U.S. officials question whether it was he or a double who made a televised speech, either on tape or live, to Iraqis earlier today. This is, however, the tape you just saw was of Saddam Hussein speaking last night. Saddam Hussein, or somebody looking like him, has now appeared twice on Iraqi television, once today, once last night. There are reports of a second TV broadcast later today showing Saddam conducting a cabinet meeting. And so there have been two what are believed to be appearances by Saddam Hussein, but there is some question is undergoing analysis in Washington of whether it's actually Saddam. And Iraq is claiming to have shot down a U.S. helicopter. Scott Pelley reported on that before. He said a helicopter did go down. I believe it was unclear and left unconfirmed whether the helicopter had been shot down or crashed of its own accord, but no question that one U.S. helicopter went down in Iraq. At least some members of the crew are reported safe, and I believe that Scott Pelley reported that all of the members of that helicopter, whether it was knocked down or went down of its own accord, keep in mind there have been sandstorms, and sandstorms are hell on helicopters, so it may be a while before we know what the facts are in that. There is no official U.S. confirmation of that claim of shooting down the helicopter. Now, that's the situation, and let me quickly go to you, General. I'm a little confused. We have the Marines, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the British troops all crossing into southern Iraq, but this unidentified official says this is not the big ground invasion. What's going on here?
Well, the report that it quite possibly may not be the ground attack is a distinct possibility. What you may have found is 4 deployed Iraqi forces with their artillery and their missiles that earlier tried to target the Americans were a threat. And we then moved against them to push them back, to destroy their artillery, their missiles, or to push them beyond the distance where they could engage our forces.
For that purpose only?
Could be.
Not for the purpose of driving to Baghdad immediately?
That's correct. It could be.
Could be. So let us say that here's a case where the proverbial fog of war has descended to some degree.
Right.
Thank you, General. Now, for centuries, people have spoken of the fog of war, so I don't want to leave that. It's become a cliche. I'm reluctant to use it. But what it refers to is the confusion factor, which is always strong on the battlefield, particularly in the early going, correct?
Correct. And, you know, I mean, that's something that everybody has to deal with. The difference here, however, is our forces are very, very well trained. They have their mission. They understand their mission. They know what's required of them. They're competent. They're confident. They've got good leaders. They're able to adjust very quickly to changing situations. So although the plan may not be what initially was envisioned, our ability to rapidly change our plan, the flexibility and versatility of our force, enables us to do things that the Iraqis cannot begin to contend with.
Thank you, General. Strikes against Baghdad have been heavy today, in addition to the somewhat lighter strikes last night, in fact, considerably lighter last night. Richard Schlesinger, our CBS News correspondent, has a report on the weapons used.
Well, Dan, of course, we don't know exactly what weapons were used in this latest attack, but we do know that since the last Gulf War, the U.S. military has got weapons that are infinitely more accurate. I believe I heard General Kernan talking yesterday pleasantly about something called the J-Dam. That is an attachment that fits on the back of a conventional bomb. It's a tail assembly that they just bolt on very very simply onto the back of any old dumb bomb, as they call them. In that tail assembly is a satellite navigation system, and what that allows the military to do is pinpoint these targets with unprecedented accuracy. They believe that they can hit a target within 30 feet from 10 miles away and 25,000 feet up. Now, you say we were able to do that in the first Gulf War with the laser-guided bombs, and you're right, we were. The problem with those was that in bad weather, sometimes the laser was reflected and the accuracy suffered. These satellite-guided JDAM bombs can be used in any kind of weather. They are incredibly accurate. The statistics are amazing. They say that one bomb can do the work of a dozen old bombs, that 2 airplanes filled with these bombs can do the work that 20 airplanes did with old bombs. So you can see this is an enormous advance in the military arsenal. You might want to think of it as sort of like the difference between attacking a target with a machine gun or attacking it with a sniper's rifle. So that's going to make a difference, the commanders believe. And when American commanders go to war, you know and I know, Dan, collateral damage, killing innocent people is something that is very much on their mind. With this ability to target things with this amount of specificity, with this accuracy, the hope is that will reduce the collateral damages. Dan.
Richard Schlesinger, thanks. We, by nature, spend so much time talking about the weaponry and the equipment. It may be time to remind ourselves of what the late General George S. Patton said, and that is that wars are won not by weapons or equipment, that wars are won by men, and in the case of the modern Army, men and women in combat. And when we talk about the Marine Expeditionary Force and the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division and the British force going across the border into Iraq, now with the cautionary note that they may not proceed forward very far, may not. Maybe what they're trying to do is suppress what the Iraqi forces are there, and there may be a pause before continuing on with the great, put in quotation marks, land invasion. We simply don't know. But when we talk of these forces, remember that these forces are made up of thousands of 2 feet in 2 boots, walking the ground, hunkered down inside a Bradley fighting vehicle or inside a tank, that we just like to remind you from time to time that while we show you a lot of weaponry, and we sometimes show the results of what the weaponry does, for example, the Scott Pelley very good live reports all morning long of helicopter assaults and artillery fire, walking ahead of the infantry, preparing the way, that it's easy to fix in all this high technology. But in the end, wars are won by men and women on the ground, in the cockpit of aircraft, and at as many ships at sea supporting them. The Navy and the naval forces have gotten not quite as much attention as maybe some of the others. Let's go back to Scott Pelley right quick. Scott?
Dan, what we're observing here on the border seems to fit pretty well with what you were just hearing out of Washington, that perhaps this is not the main armored attack. We have an area here where we have a great deal of American armor and British armor. And if this was the main land invasion, I would have expected to hear and see tanks and armored personnel carriers sweeping by this position, and we don't see that right here. Now, one of the problems with battlefield coverage is you only know what you can see around you. No doubt there's a great deal going on in other locations, but given the amount of armor that was concentrated in this area, I would have expected to see a lot of tracks moving north from here, and at the moment we're not seeing that. What we are seeing is a great deal of artillery, and we have a little bit of videotape of an incident that occurred very near our position just a few moments ago. Hard to tell exactly what munition this was. Could have been a multiple launch rocket system. For some reason, the area that's immediately behind me, immediately across the Iraqi border, has been an area of interest. Dan?
Scott Pelley with videotape of the artillery attack, and Scott is reporting live from the Iraqi-Kuwaiti border. Now, inside Iraq, with the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, CBS News correspondent Jim Axelrod. Jim, can you come up on your video phone?
We are still in Kuwait. Let me just set the scene for you a little bit. We are in our chemical suits as ordered by the military. It's about the third of 6 stages of seriousness as far as preparation for any kind of attack. We are at a staging area. You can see behind me, using our night scope vision, any number of Bradley fighting vehicles and tanks and so forth. About, I'd say, 2 hours ago now, we witnessed a volley of artillery fire from the Paladin 155 howitzers. We have some videotape that we shot during this, and you can see the explosions. I believe, if I hear correctly, that was me on the phone at that point. I'm sure you could hear that. That's what it looked like in the skies over northern Kuwait just about 2 hours ago. As I say, we had a volley of fire from the Paladin 155 howitzers. Also, we saw the multiple launch rocket system fire. Instead of the multiple rockets at once, just one of the telephone pole size rockets, as we told you before, about 1,000 pounds of HE explosive in there. Dan, we should say, as I've been hearing some discussion about what might be going on regarding invasion, this point needs to be made, that the road needs to be prepared for the movement of troops. That needs to be done by American forces as well. So even before any large-scale invasion, the road needs to be prepared for any kind of troops, and that may be what's going on as well. Dan?
Jim Axelrod, first of all, and I want to say to our viewers, if you're scoring along with us, make that EA, which is Era Anchorman. We believe, Jim, that you were with those elements of the 3rd Army Infantry Division that had already crossed into Iraq, and I want to make it explicitly clear that where you are, you're still on the Kuwaiti side of the border. Having said that, Jim, can you shed any light on the somewhat confusing situation that the guidance, if you will, with no names attached out of Washington, is don't be misled by the moving of the Marines and the U.S. Army and even British troops into southern Iraq, that this isn't even yet the start of the, quote, big show, which is to say the main land invasion, which will be a race to the outskirts of Baghdad. What can you say about that?
Well, Dan, I think what you probably have here is some probing. In other words, it's really a twofold situation that we see. There is some probing into the opposition positions, the observation positions for Iraq. So the United States military wants to get a sense of just what kind of eyes are being kept on them. But much more importantly, as I mentioned a moment ago, there is a necessity for paving a way. In other words, a tremendous number of vehicles and tanks and Bradleys need to get through when the big show, as you call it, starts. To do that, there needs to be many lanes to make sure that there's a very free flow of traffic and unencumbered flow into Iraq when that call finally comes. So what you may be seeing with the Army and the Marine forces that you're describing making their way into southern Iraq is the beginning of that paving process, pushing back whatever kind of resistance there may be, trying to identify that resistance, and then preparing the roads and the paths and busting through whatever berms and laying whatever bridges need to be laid over ditches, that sort of thing. A very necessary preamble to whatever is coming when the order is finally given for, as I've heard it called, the big show. Dan?
You're seeing live with the U.S. 3rd Infantry Army Division right on the border between Kuwait and Iraq, Jim Axelrod. Bulletin, the Kuwaiti news agency, which is usually reliable and dependable, says U.S.-led troops have taken the Iraqi border town of Qasr. Let me show you where that is on our map. It's down right on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. Now, Basra is the biggest port and the main port that gives Iraq access to the Persian Gulf. But this place, Qasr, is sort of right on this border here and also is a port, although it's a smaller port. We don't know who among the U.S. troops took that, whether it's Marine or Army, but a reasonably important development. Qasr Falls in deep southern Iraq. We go back to Scott Pelley on the border, another location from where Jim Axelrod reported. Right now, first we go to Baghdad. New sirens have sounded in Baghdad, so we'll hold off on Pelley. Pelley's far south of here, hearing artillery fire as it continues to support U.S. ground troops operating in southern Iraq. For what purpose and for how long, we can't say. Let's listen to Baghdad. There were some sirens sounded. And we let you listen to that because it gives you a sense with that dark cloud from previous strikes today hanging over the city. If you're with your family in Baghdad, or if you're part of Saddam Hussein's apparatus, this is what you're seeing and that's what you're hearing. This is this night scope version of that scene. We can show you both night scope and straight away. Don't for the moment hear any more sirens wailing. Don't hear any anti-aircraft fire. We're going to hold on this picture for a bit. Remind you that developments are coming thick and fast. U.S. troops have taken a small port in very southern Iraq, the border town of Qasr. Marines, U.S. infantry soldiers, and British soldiers are active in southern Iraq. A Washington source says it's not the beginning of the main force land invasion, which General Buchanan, the translation of which would mean what?
Well, to build on what Jim was just talking about, there's another distinct possibility here. If you recall earlier, we had a report of 3 missiles that were fired in the vicinity of friendly forces. And we had that report of those Iraqis in armored vehicles that the Marines engaged that could have been forward observers for the Iraqi forces. There's a force protection issue here that's got to be considered, and that is if your position has been identified and then possibly targeted by the enemy, you're going to reposition for your self-protection. So you're going to find an awful lot of movement about this battlefield as we continually posture to either attack or defend our troops.
So what's happening inside southern Iraq now with U.S. Marines, U.S. Army soldiers, and the British troops could, I want to put that in all caps, could be a repositioning of our forces forward inside Iraq while still awaiting the main push to drive to Baghdad.
Yeah, if they're in Iraq or Kuwait, wherever. But don't forget the artillery could also range into Kuwait, so they would be repositioning. I think once we get the word that the attack is out, you're going to find that this is going to be very ferocious. It's going to be very fast-moving. It's going to be a combined armed attack, I think, and we haven't seen that yet.
And we're looking now at a live picture in Baghdad. We heard some air raid sirens there not too long ago. David Trader of Sky TV is there standing by for his main employer, Sky TV, but we have his commentary available when and if something happens in Baghdad. Already what's happened there has been somewhat can only be described as big-time bombing of specific targets, including a couple of palaces, the foreign ministry, another ministry, and let's pick up a little David Chater just now, see what he's saying. David filed this report a short while ago after one of the airstrikes, so let's pick it up.
You can see to the right of the frame, behind that larger of the 2 fires, another fire, maybe 2 fires in the distance, just flickering away. The camera now is zooming into these fires, and I think we could be seeing several different fires. There have obviously been a number of targets, a cluster of targets within a relatively small space there. I would think it's difficult to tell, probably only a few hundred yards, maybe half a mile's distance between those various smoking, flaming and burning buildings there right in the heart of Baghdad.
David Trader with his commentary of a short while ago as parts of Baghdad began to burn. I remind you again, Baghdad is a huge city, 5 or 6 million people, and what we show you in the way of damage is confined to certain sections of the city. In this case, primarily, although not confined, to the west bank of the Tigris River, and then what is believed to have been an elite Republican Guard facility just outside of Baghdad was also hit. As we talk about this, we remind you again that U.S. ground forces, Marine and Army, are in southern Iraq, so are British ground troops, but it may be a kind of forward repositioning, partly to keep the Iraqis off balance, partly for what's called force protection, which literally means protection of the U.S. and British forces. So, you know, they'd been in static positions for some little while. Perhaps the idea was the Iraqis were beginning to zero in on them, so they just moved forward some. It's a reminder that battlefields are usually murky and chaotic, whether you're talking about Baghdad or the desert down in the south. Troops get lost, orders get bungled, bombs go astray, orders change. That's the nature of war, in both its savagery and its confusion. Let's talk some about this port city of Qasr, which has just been taken. What do we know about that, Steve?
It's a small port on the Iraq-Kuwait border. It was actually where the Iraq-Kuwait monitoring organization that the UN had in place until just a few days ago. It's where they had their headquarters. It's neither here nor there land between Kuwait and Iraq, and it was controlled by the UN, essentially.
Basra being the big port down there, but this being one of the small ports.
Exactly. It's on the way up to Basra, but it has its own offloading facilities there and could be useful in that capacity.
General Konan, if you could pull back what we call on television the wide shot, what's the most important thing for people to know at this hour?
Well, I think right now that we are still setting conditions as to what we are going to do, and the timing of what we're going to do is going to be driven by the President and the Secretary of Defense and General Franks once those conditions have been met. We have not seen a massive ground assault yet. When we do, I think what you're going to see is they'll probably skirt Basra. They'll move very quickly to try to secure the oil fields and the crossing sites across the Tigris and Euphrates River to open up that axis of advance into Baghdad.
So we have seen ground assault in southern Iraq, but we have not yet seen the massive ground invasion that we've been talking about for months.
Yeah, it's just a cautionary. I'm not sure we even saw a ground assault. We may have seen repositioning for force protection to get out of the way of, get away from where the Iraqi artillery could hit the U.S. forces or friendly forces. So it may be just a repositioning, just a caution on that.
Let's go to General Perry Smith if we can get him up very quickly. You don't have much time before the break, but General Smith, put in perspective for us today's attacks on Baghdad.
Well, it reminds me, Dan, of when I was a small child. I was on the way to Sunday school and watched the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It's pretty scary for small kids. On the other hand, the families, I think, are protected. They're in their homes. They're not going after civilian targets. A very precise campaign, very much different from the campaign against Baghdad 12 years ago, where we went against bridges and a lot of targets. So you're going to see less bombing and much more precise bombing than we saw before. Notice the no-fly zone. I want to talk a little bit that doesn't apply anymore. But on the other hand, it is an area now that we have softened up and continue to soften up. So when the Army forces and the Marines start coming forward, much of this territory is going to be well covered, already softened up, and make it an easier run. So when they run toward Baghdad, in some ways it would be a lot easier than it would be coming in from the north, where the no-fly zone, as you notice, is much smaller, and there's a bigger gap between there and the time they come into Baghdad. And if we have time, I'd like to hit a couple of the airplanes that are involved, Dan, and stop me if I take too much time.
Don't worry, General, I will.
Thank you. I think it's good to look at this stealth fighter here very quickly to remind you that these are 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs. They're not GPS. They're laser-guided, and the airplane itself does the lasing.
Excuse me, General, GPS being?
GPS being global positioning satellites, which many of the bombs now are controlled by satellite all the way to the target.
I know you understand that. A lot of people know that, but grandmother may not.
I understand. In the case of a laser now, the airplane has a laser in the airplane, points at a specific target, holds that laser on the target, releases the bomb, a 2,000-pound bomb, and the bomb goes all the way down to the target.
and hits the target where it's being lased by the aircraft. So the airplane does it all by himself. He doesn't have any support from global positioning satellites, but it's still very, very accurate. And of course, he can operate at night with impunity because it is a stealthy airplane. You notice the crazy formation of the airplane. It cannot be seen by radar at all.
General Perry Smith, thank you very much. An excellent summation of some of the weaponry being used. Now, Dateline Baghdad, Iraqi television indicates and seeks to indicate strongly that the Iraqi leadership, including Saddam Hussein, is still alive, well, and intact. However, the report has not been verified. There's frankly no way to verify it completely. A TV network owned, surprise, by Saddam Hussein's son, reports that the Iraqi leader, Saddam Hussein, met today with what are described his top aides and members of his cabinet. It's said, again, no way to confirm this, this included Vice President Taha Ramadan, the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz, and the Foreign Minister. This Iraqi television report says, and I quote, that they met to review military and other measures to resist the aggression. Now, this report came just after Baghdad was hit, and hit harder today again than it was last night. Bulletin Iraqi radio says U.S. missiles hit Baghdad family home of Saddam Hussein. Again, there's no way to verify that as yet. But to repeat, Iraqi radio says U.S. missiles hit the Baghdad family home of Saddam Hussein. Baghdad radio said that there had not been any casualties. Again, no way to confirm that. We're going to go to videotape of these pictures are from Italian television. Different shot of the explosions in Baghdad, different view from the Italian TV. Let's watch and listen. Well, I don't believe they in fact have any natural sound on this. Now, this would be a shot from the eastern side of the Tigris River. If my time in Baghdad can refresh my memory quite enough, I believe that wherever this camera position was, it was on the eastern side of the Tigris River, and this is a picture taken on the western side of the river. I can't be certain of that.
I think it's the other way around. The fixed camera positions are on the Ministry of Information, and I think this is looking across the river at what was in the early 1990s the Ministry of Defense. It was on the this is actually on what we're looking at is on the east side of the river, viewed from the west side. It's the old Ministry of Defense. It was bombed in 1998 and then rebuilt.
Well, let's get the picture back, and I believe I do stand corrected because now we have a somewhat wider shot if we can get that back up. But at any rate, it won't matter on what side of the river it is. It gave you and I do believe that it was on the eastern side of the Tigris River with the camera on the western side. It was just a different view of the attack we showed to you, and indeed you heard earlier on here on CBS News. Turkey has agreed to allow overflights of its territory, at least not yet agreeing to any ground forces put in there. U.S. Marines, U.S. Army troops, British ground forces are believed to be, are reported to be, not just believed to be, are reported to be in some kind of activity on the Iraqi side of the border. Cautionary note, this does not necessarily mean that the main force invasion has yet started. And you say, well, I heard some reports earlier. That's true. But this is a changing situation. I remind you again that frequently what you hear early on in situations such as this, particularly wars, what you hear first is sometimes wrong or not complete. What we do know is that ground forces are inside Iraq. This is CBS News coverage of America at War.
Several miles back over into Iraq right now. You see them light up the sky, and you can hear a rumble. It sounds like there'll be several more volleys. This has all been going on for about the last, I'd say about 15 minutes. Here comes, you can see a flash of light on the horizon. Here comes one.
Jim Axelrod, at what are they shooting?
Well, Dan, when we ask the military that, they will tell us unspecified targets. However, we are led to believe there are what they're referring to as OPs, observation points. In other words, trying to soften up the southern Iraq, whatever military positions there may be. They just don't know for sure what the troop strength is of the Iraqi military in the south, how much has actually been pulled north to Baghdad. So what they're trying to do is soften up some of the observation posts that the Iraqi soldiers have in southern Iraq to determine who, if anyone, is actually manning them. So when the assault comes from the north of Kuwait into the south of Iraq, they'll have a much better sense of what kind of opposition the United States military will be facing. So that's basically what these rockets that are being launched and the Paladin howitzer artillery that we've seen earlier this evening, that's what's the thinking behind these.
Well, Jim, and what are the chances that part of this is also forced defense? In other words, one can imagine that across that border there are certain Iraqis who are creeping and crawling, peeping and hiding, trying to pick out U.S. targets, and some of this fire could or could it not be directed at those kinds of operatives saying, listen, we're not going to just sit here in a squat position and let them pick their targets and pound away at us.
Dan, that's exactly what we heard from several officers today at the staging position where we were. They kept saying that it's the enemy, in this case Saddam Hussein, who gets 51% of the vote. In other words, what happens in any kind of military conflict is determined by the enemy. So in other words, the United States military commanders made a decision once those Scuds were launched this afternoon to unleash the barrage. That's what, in the part of the purpose anyway, of what you're seeing right now is all about. It's answering not only what came across earlier this afternoon, but in the event that there is any Iraqi soldiers in a hostile position, in other words, not ready to capitulate or give up, they're not going to take any chances, again, to soften up and shape the area that the 3rd Infantry will move through at some point in what we assume to be the near future.
Jim, as we look at the artillery being fired and the flares and the rocketry, reminded that General Patton said in war, the only sure defense is offense. And lest we forget, the efficiency of offense depends on the warlike souls of those conducting it, which means those young men and women of the 3rd Army Infantry Division with whom you are right there on the border.
Yes, Dan, and you know, it's very interesting. You have a tremendous number in the private and specialist ranks. You're talking about 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids. And this is the first taste of combat for so many of them. And I talked to an officer yesterday who said in his sort of pep talk, that age-old traditional rallying of the troops that each officer does with the soldiers under his command, they address the fact that fear is not necessarily a bad thing as long as it does not break a soldier's focus. Acknowledging that if you're 18 or 19 and head into combat for the first time is part of the process of being able to be effective as a soldier. Dan?
Jim Axelrod live with the 3rd Infantry. Let's hold this up for a minute. General Buck Kernan, what is this we're seeing? What kind of fire is, or can you tell?
It probably just looks like artillery fire coming from the ground. I can't tell. I think those were the tapes that Jim was showing us earlier of the suppression that was going out from the MLRS and the 3rd
What is
ID.
that, the MLRS?
The multiple launch rocket system and long-range rocket system, and the artillery that was used probably to take away the eyes of the enemy and also to destroy any of his artillery or missile systems that may be able to engage us.
Black, you know that area of the world, you know the geography. What's down there along that Kuwaiti-Iraqi border? Set aside whatever may be the military, it's just basically your average sand dune country, isn't it?
It's even flatter than sand dunes. But about the only depressions there are the little levees that are built up. The water table's quite high, so if you want to have a road or anything like that, you've got to sort of pile up some dirt to have a road there. There's some oil fields in that area, but basically it's sort of a cross between a swamp and a flat, sandy desert.
We go to Washington, a United States Senator, bona fide certified war hero from the Vietnam War, Republican Senator from Arizona, Senator John McCain. Senator, good to see you.
Thank you, Dan. It's good to be with you.
What are you thinking as you watch and hear what's happening with at least the early beginnings of this ground war and great historic but also dangerous undertaking by the people of the United States?
Well, I think my emotions are that of most Americans: pride, concern, deep and abiding respect and affection for the men and women that are doing the job. We saw last night the incredible flexibility of our military capabilities. You know, Dan, even in '91, when only 10% of our weapons were precision guided, and now 90%, the ability to identify a target and then put massive firepower on it as we did is a remarkable technological thing. And the war that you and I spent a lot of time around, there was no way you could accomplish something like that. Second of all, obviously, since the major battle has not been joined, still some apprehension, but great hope from some of the signs we see and hear that perhaps the Iraqi resistance will be not so strong.
Senator, this may not be the best time to talk about it, but looking far ahead, whenever the American invasion comes and whenever it's successful, let us hope and pray, however one may feel about the war, that once we're engaged it is successful. Then comes the hard part of making the transition. Let's talk about that so the American public can be prepared for it.
We probably should, and probably should have talked a lot more about it before it began. I'm an optimist, Dan. I'm a great believer in freedom and democracy and the miraculous things that the hope and aspirations for it can achieve. I believe American troops will be greeted as liberators. I believe, despite the different schisms within the country, that we will see, with the help of many other nations, the beginnings of a free and democratic society. It took our country a long, long time. Many would allege we're not there yet. And yet I'm confident that this will not only be a great benefit to the Iraqi people who have lived under the most terribly cruel, oppressive regime, but it also will send a message in the Middle East to the neighboring countries, and it will also send a message to some people in this country who I believe have condescendingly believed that somehow the people of the Middle East don't have the same hopes and dreams and aspirations that all people, in my opinion, hold.
Senator, what do we know about the cost of this? The administration, perhaps for understandable reason, didn't want to talk about the cost, but last week there were estimates of maybe 80, 90, maybe $100 billion. In your opinion, is that a lowball estimate or pretty much on the money?
Don't know, because we don't know how long it lasts, but I've heard estimates from as low as 35 to 40 billion up as high as you said, and then of course that's not the reconstruction cost. This time we will be bearing the financial burden. Last time it was borne by the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and others, and I think that has to be taken into calculations when we consider whether we have tax cuts, increased spending on other programs, and we're going to have to make some very tough decisions, and so far, unfortunately, we've avoided them, both for good reason and not so good reason.
Last question, Senator. Can we afford the war and another tax cut at the same time?
I don't think that we should rule out a stimulus, because I think we probably need it given the condition of the economy. I just don't think we can do it now when we have no idea what the cost of the war is or the post-war reconstruction. I think the appropriate time would be once we've figured that all out. But I'm not opposed to a stimulus, but I don't understand how we would want to proceed with that at this moment.
Senator John McCain, live from Capitol Hill, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Dan.
We're going to go, first of all, let's show you a picture of live from Baghdad where things have quieted down, if we can get that picture up. Because in another pre-dawn attack, it has now been confirmed the U.S. used not only cruise missiles, but also the F-117 stealth bomber aircraft to try to kill Saddam and senior Iraqi leaders, and also specific targets in Baghdad, including several ministries, some defense installations on the outskirts of Baghdad, some elite Republican Guard units. In southern Iraq, U.S. forces have launched intense artillery barrages and repeatedly, it's reported, have crossed into Iraq near the Iraq-Kuwait border. And we're going to take you now to Scott Pelley, if we can. Again, we're trying one here with our technology and also flying by wire, if you will, to see if we can get Scott Pelley up. Scott, describe for us the situation of the last half hour and then review for us quickly what's happened there along the border where you are. You seem to be at a nexus of a considerable firing and combat activity.
Dan, the battle has been going on all around us, and it seems clear at this point, now that we've been able to watch this for a few hours, that at least part of what we're seeing is a cavalry and scout operation. This would be combined armor and attack helicopters probing the enemy's defenses, finding out where the enemy's observation posts are, and attacking those directly. One of those observation posts, excuse me, appears to be directly behind me. Iraq is right behind me. And we saw a number of attacks on this position earlier today. We have a little bit of videotape from earlier this evening. A number of helicopters scouted this area, and then we saw a barrage of artillery hit that place. It has been hit by helicopter rockets. It's been hit by artillery throughout the night. Another helicopter flew by a short time ago, hovered over the same position, surveilled it, and flew away, and we haven't seen anything else from there since. But it is clear from the earmarks of what I just described that a lot of what we've seen tonight has not been a massive armored invasion.
Excuse me 1 second, Scott, while we cut away. This is CBS News continuing coverage of America at War. And we're returning with our coverage, and we pick up again where we left off with Scott Pelley. Scott, I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I know you understand. And you were saying to us that there's been sporadic and in some cases fairly continuing artillery fire and helicopter attack across the border. And later information indicates that some, if not all of this, is designed to spook what's on the other side, to keep them from spying too much, if you will, and targeting in U.S. forces.
Exactly, Dan. As you know, Saddam can't fly his Air Force, and of course he doesn't have anything like a spy satellite. So he has no way of knowing what's on the battlefield unless his own scouts and his own border patrols are able to divine what the Americans and the British are doing in this position. I think tonight's operation has had a great deal to do with blinding Saddam and his forces and probing the defenses to see what would happen when we went in with our armor and with our helicopters. We've had a lot of that tonight. At the moment, it happens to be quiet, but we've had several hours of heavy artillery barrages, and in fact, right now I can hear multiple launch rocket system rockets landing at another position not very far away from where we are now. I think we're going to be in for this kind of operation all night long, Dan.
Scott Pelley live along the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border, where there has been a lot of helicopter attack, weaponry fired, and artillery fire. We're holding here for the moment because the White House said they would have some videotape of the president speaking with some members of his staff. We don't have it yet, but we expect to have it reasonably soon. Now, to recap, Turkey has given permission for overflights, not yet for ground troops in Turkey, but it would be a big help even to get overflights. Baghdad has been attacked again, a bigger attack than last night by a considerable margin. Several ministries hit. The Iraqis say Saddam Hussein's family home was hit, but said there are no casualties. Elite Republican Guard unit attacked around Baghdad by a combination of cruise Tomahawk missiles and the F-117 stealth bomber. In the south, Marines, U.S. Army troops, and some British ground forces are operating just inside the Iraqi-Kuwait border on the Iraqi side. Washington advises don't be misled that this may very well not be the start of the major ground invasion. And so now we go to the White House and I believe videotape of an earlier appearance by President Bush.
I've called my cabinet together to review our strategies to make the world more peaceful, to make our country more secure, to make the lives of our citizens as healthy and as prosperous as possible. We heard from Secretary Rumsfeld, who briefed us on the early stages of the war. There's no question we've set the finest of our citizens into harm's way. They perform with great skill and great bravery. We thank them. We thank their loved ones. We appreciate their sacrifice. Word from Secretary Powell, who briefed us on the ever-growing coalition of the willing nations who support our deep desire for peace and freedom. Over 40 nations now support our efforts. We're grateful for their determination. We appreciate their vision, and we welcome their support. As well, we discussed the need to make sure we have plans in place to encourage economic vitality and growth. We will continue to push for a Medicare system that is compassionate for our seniors. We care deeply about the fact that some children in our society can't read. We want the best of education for every citizen in America. This cabinet is confident about the future of our country. We're confident we can achieve our objectives. I'm grateful for their service to their country. Thank you.
President Bush, that was on videotape. He spoke just a few minutes ago in Washington as U.S. ground forces are operating, at least to some degree, just inside the border in southern Iraq. And a U.S. air attack has been completed, apparently for the moment, on Baghdad. This is a second-day attack. You're watching and listening to CBS News, continuous coverage of America at war. Stick in here with us.
This CBS News special report is part of our continuing coverage of America at War. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.